How's it going? Yendis DC, your aspiring Pokemon almanac, here to give you guys kind of a behind the scenes look at how I got that name, but also what I'm doing for my Pokenatomy project. I've had a couple people ask what goes into it, kind of research, where I get my sources, that kind of thing. And I thought I'd take a minute to make a relatively quick video for you guys to show you what kind of goes into making this series. First, we have the Pokenatomy unofficial guide here and Pokenatomy 2. So as you can see, there are two versions or two editions out right now for the first and second gens of Pokemon. There is quite a bit of difference between them. As you can see, the diagram here, descriptions, key facts. But over here, you can see the diagrams are a little bit more in depth. They typically have the eggs displayed, which I think is a little bit cooler because it helps the book stay a little more consistent. Overall, I think it's just something that they've learned a lot from in their first go-around to improve on the second go-around. So I'm really excited about doing this series once it gets to this point because it's a little bit more in-depth and a little bit more complex. But focusing on what we have right now, we do have the Pokenatomy book. As you can see here, I've got all my Post-its for keeping track of what the notes in the series that I want to make. All in all, this has been a pretty complex process, probably a lot more than I expected it to be, if I'm being totally honest. And so I'll kind of just take a Pokemon here, give you guys an example of what I kind of run through on a daily basis trying to get these things set up. So starting with Bulbasaur here, we got the first Pokemon, also one of the more complex and unique Pokemon, as it is, part plant-based and kind of not really based on any real-life animals, so it doesn't necessarily have a real-life counterpart like something like Pidgey would. So some of these are a little more difficult than others. Things like Pidgey, it's pretty easy. You can copy a lot of the information down from Pigeon, anatomy, behavior, biology, whatever. But Bulbasaur, this one takes a lot more research, a lot more sort of assumptions, and a lot more scientific understanding. So getting into that, what I do first when I'm starting out a new Pokemon, and I do hope to release these series in evolutionary sets. So in theory, I'll be doing Bulbasaur, Ivysaur, Venusaur, and then, the other starters all in their own sort of videos, so it doesn't get too overwhelming. So the Bulbasaur here, we're starting out, we're going to read through this, of course, get a basic understanding of what's going on, look at the diagram. Then I kind of start by just, there's my number 2 notebook. Then I'll start by just taking notes on primarily stuff that I don't understand or I think is going to be really important or needs fact checking, because there's a lot of stuff in this that's hard to kind of nail down. And so the author, Chris Stoll, had to make some of his own choices in how he approached these. And, since I'm not writing my own book, I want to give you guys the most accurate information I can possible. So there is a lot of stuff that I have to fact check, maybe disagree with, maybe add to. And that kind of is the biggest hurdle in the initial phase, because really kind of identifying what needs more research than others to be as efficient as possible with my time is kind of the biggest first step. So I'll go through, write down all the key facts and all the basic information, things about behavior, habitat, diet, all that kind of stuff that really make up the base of kind of an animal's lifestyle. Once I've gotten all of that written down on these basic notes, I'll go through and I'll, just roughly Google all the stuff, like I said, scientific terms that I might not know or whatever. And then begins the real part of the research phase. Here we go. So what I'll start with first is go to, like Pokemon licensed or Pokemon supported websites. And I'll start looking at this and comparing it with the book, seeing if there's any discrepancies, primarily with the Pokedex entries. Because as far as the world goes, Pokemon canonically is kind of loose because we have movies, we have the TV show, there is a manga, but the TV show I think aired like at the same time or right before the manga, so it's not like most animes where you have an original source material then turned into a show. It kind of all developed together. And as time went on, a lot of the rules and laws of the Pokemon world changed as we discovered new Pokemon, as we found new regions, and, yada, yada, yada. So I feel like the Pokedex is probably the best place for me to get my root accurate information. And once I've confirmed that that matches the information in the book, or, disagrees with it, then I can start taking the next step in research, which at this point is taking copious notes on all the stuff I find. So the written notes were just about the book, and then I make this typed out research note page that will incorporate all that I've learned from the internet and from the book, as well as things that I might have questions about or have assumptions about that isn't covered anywhere. So that way I can bring it up for you guys in the video, or I can develop my own way to speak about it. So Bulbasaur was a little more complex, partially because, like I said, it doesn't really have a real life counterpart. The closest thing, honestly, being the leaf sheep, which is one of my favorite real life animals. It's really, really cool. But even this is nowhere near a Bulbasaur, as you can see. This is a centimeter long slug, a sea slug that actually eats algae, and then what does it do? It retains the chloroplasts and then kind of distributes them into its, like back leaves, which then can photosynthesize light and turn it into glucose for energy. So that's very similar to how Bulbasaur's bulb works on its back. It is a full plant. It is symbiotic with the Pokemon. So you can see in the diagram in the book, it is, fully incorporated into the body. So understanding the kinds of impacts that's going to have, understanding where that draws the line on what Bulbasaur is, plant versus animal, can get a little messy. And so initially I had to do as much research on as I could. And luckily I did go to school for biology at one point, so it helped a little bit having some of this information. But starting with any other sources that I could find that have Bulbasaur anatomy, anything I could find that has to do with the science behind photosynthesis and the structure of leaf versus plant cells, because with Bulbasaur being a kind of plant Pokemon, its skin is, according to the book, according to the lore that I can find, and according to what we're going with today, its skin is actually made up of simple plant cells that don't have the potential for photosynthesis. So they don't actually have chloroplasts, which is why it needs the bulb on its back to photosynthesize and produce glucose, which then it can be transferred into the body of Bulbasaur and used as an energy source. And so trying to understand how that makes sense and making it sound as realistic as possible, but without making stuff up and breaking the laws of nature too much, gets a little complicated. So I'm really happy, especially with Bulbasaur, because a lot of people have done similar projects to this, and most of them didn't really go anywhere, but that means everybody started with Bulbasaur. So there's a lot more information about this Pokemon than a lot of the other ones here. Here we have an article from 2016, or this kind of blog post by someone named Trevor Ford. If you're out there, thanks Ford, you helped a lot, because they came up with a more scientific approach to Bulbasaur's system. And so you can see here talking about the cellular makeup, talking about displaying the equation here for photosynthesis, and talking about how that is incorporated successfully into Bulbasaur's sort of diet and what that can do for it in the sense of providing energy over a couple of weeks if it can't find food, and all of that good stuff. Even more important, though, because understanding not just that the plant is a symbiotic, not necessarily a parasite, but this thing on the back that leaches in and then provides, the glucose in return for a life force that can keep it sustained, but it also acts as a controlled mechanism by Bulbasaur. So it's not just that it's incorporated into Bulbasaur, it's that Bulbasaur also has a certain level of control backwards into the bulb, making it possible to release toxins, vine whip, razor leaf, all that kind of good stuff. So it's a very interesting system here that's pretty unique to only Bulbasaur and is not really seen in any examples in the real world. So going through all these different posts and having a lot of people approach this idea made it a little bit easier for me to come up with a fully formed concept, alongside things like the Pokedex entries, which give very base information, like this fact that it's carrying the seed on its back from birth. So that then relates to a process that we talk about later, where Venusaur's plant in its body is able to implant the embryos with seeds. So that way, when the eggs are laid, they're born with the seed already. And what happens if that doesn't happen properly, and blah, 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 blah. So as you can see, there's a ton of information that goes into this. And this is just right now what we're talking about. This is literally just the information I need to get the diagram explained. This doesn't even go into the behavior, the diet, everything else about Bulbasaur. And so, trying to compare an animal to a plant, it doesn't have any bones, for instance. And small plants like flowers, their stems are kept upright by hydraulic pressure. So largely the water and, everything else as a liquid that runs through the length of the stem is what allows it to stay rigid. And so then how does that work for Bulbasaur? And especially once you get to the Venusaur level, how does that work? Because this thing weighs 110 kilograms, somewhere around like 220 pounds or 250 pounds or something like that, I think it is. So, how does a body with no bones support that kind of weight? And how does it run, or how does it, do anything? And that was, like I said, all just to understand the diagram. Then we get into, physiology, talking about how the bulb itself actually acts as a second source of neuroganglia, basically meaning that it's kind of like our stomachs, where we have so many nerve endings and so many neurons that control our body's ecosystem by keeping it balanced, keeping it healthy, pH levels, all that kind of good stuff, that it kind of needs to act independently. So you have now the extra neural sensors inside Bulbasaur's stomach, like everybody else does, but you also have a second set inside the bulb. And all of those can help Bulbasaur because, this allows for kind of instantaneous reactions, which allow for the bulb as a reflex to use its abilities like vines to protect Bulbasaur without Bulbasaur having to consciously make those thoughts and those efforts. And then that changes how the musculature works, because there's things like actin and myosin, which are chemicals that are responsible for how our brain interacts with our muscles and how it triggers actions and reflexes and things like that. So the bulb having that extra neural ganglia allows for it to reflexively send these signals bypassing the brain directly to these musculatures and then act, which is extremely complicated, extremely interesting. But to understand that for someone who maybe hasn't ever taken classes on this, I knew this was going to be very difficult to understand and to fully grasp. And that's why I wanted to take the time to make this series for you guys. And then from there, we get into how it changes as it evolves, how those middle evolutions set themselves up for the future, talking about ones like Wartortle, and how it creates or develops chambers on its back to then prep for the cannons that will become its back in Blastoise. So it's also not just a comprehensive look at one Pokemon, but it's also looking at how the adaptations this Pokemon has are going to impact Pokemon later on in its evolutionary line, especially in some crazier ones like Charizard, where it goes from being a lizard to a dragon, basically, because it has wings and a longer tail and, all that kind of stuff. Understanding, and I do really like how they did this, understanding that there is, in theory, a scientific answer behind almost any phenomena, even if it seems, like science is so advanced is indistinguishable from magic or whatever that is, technology. Seeing that displayed here accurately is what really got me so excited about this. So looking at Charmander and talking about how it has isoprene that it extracts from the plants it eats to create a fuel for its flames, all that kind of stuff becomes the bulk of my first stage, really researching the physiology and understanding the science behind how it makes sense, or how it possibly could make sense. You know what I mean? Because some of these Pokemon like Clefairy, those are technically aliens. So there's all sorts of different stuff in here that doesn't really fall within the line of real biology. And then we go into what they eat and why they eat it, how they hunt using their vines to catch birds and stuff like that. It is a lot to go through. And then the fact checking has been the most difficult part, because there's only so much information. So you may read something in one of these books that doesn't really sound like it makes a whole lot of sense, but there's nothing to support it or, deny it or refute it. So you kind of have to go with your gut and say like, okay, this doesn't make a lot of sense, but it's okay because Pokemon. Or this doesn't make a lot of sense, but I see why Mr. Stoll made that assumption. So what do I want to do with that information? And using all the research I find, I can try my best to come up with a good answer. A perfect example of that, again, is Wartortle, because here we want to give it realistic, parameters, saying that it lives for like 13 to 34 years. But if you go to the Pokedex entries, you're gonna get answers like this, where it says Wartortle is said to live 10,000 years, and its fairy tale is a popular symbol of longevity. What do I do with that? And it doesn't say anything about how long Squirtle or Blastoise lives. So, like, do we give them normal timelines and only Wartortle lives for 10,000 years? Or do we assume Squirtle can live for like 5,000 and Blastoise can live for like 20,000 based on their, you know what I mean? So there's a lot of stuff in here that they just kind of throw out there and you're like, all right, well, that makes no sense. So do I just tell people, yeah, they live for 10,000 years and they have 100 trainers in the course of their lifetime or something? Or do we go with what the book says, where they kept an idea of hyper-realism and, you know, made it 34 years based on like what a normal smallish turtle would live to be. And that fact checking is hard because the facts aren't actually there to an extent. So ultimately taking kind of a hodgepodge of information about the real life animal, so in this case about turtles, finding the longest lived turtles and the shortest lived turtles, finding a history of how long turtles have possibly lived, trying to come up with an equation for why they might have multiplied it that long. Like if they live 100 years, is this like a 10 times thing? So then maybe we could figure it out for the other Pokemon, or do we even bother? And all of that back and forth is why I think getting rid of the key facts section for the egg section in the next book was a really smart idea, because it doesn't force you to come up with these answers. Whereas when you're forced to, you may not have very good ones. And so you're just going to like throw something in there like 13 to 34 years when the Pokedex says 10,000. It's like, yeah, that's ridiculous. But the most canon thing we have said it. So what do you do? So I'm really excited to get into the second book because I think it's going to be a little bit easier as far as the fact checking and research goes to get through this. But getting back to Bulbasaur and getting back to the next steps in here, what I then have done is turned all of that conversation with myself into these research notes. And so as you can see here from Bulbasaur alone, I've got over 2 pages of stuff, partially because of explaining, you know, different pieces of plant cells and why they've been substituted or why they've been substituted and how, and all that kind of stuff makes Bulbasaur a little bit longer than, say, somebody like Pidgey, which is, you know, really just based on, as you can see, there's a lot of stuff here, Pidgey based on a pigeon, so it's a little bit easier. But in this case, the feet were improperly displayed, so I had to go learn about bird feet and about every different kind of bird foot out there and why they are what they are for whatever environment they live in and blah, 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 blah. So I'm learning a ton about a ton, which is a lot of fun here. But that is a lot of information that maybe not everybody cares about or maybe doesn't really add to the conversation. So first, I'm just doing kind of an informational dump here, getting everything I've found that is factually correct, or writing down stuff that wasn't, and then how I'm going to refute it and citing my evidence for that. For instance, Pidgey being a good example, because I don't know why bird feet are a weird one in this book. There's a lot of problems with them, but Pidgey was described as a didactyl footed bird, which really only ostriches have that because they have these 2 toes. Pidgey, as you can see in this photo, actually has 3 toes, making it anisodactyl, I believe it was. No, zygodactyl. Anisodactyl is the most common. Well, anyway, you get the idea. So this is the informational dump where I put all that, and then after that, I go back and where's the other one? Oh, also forgot about this one. The other big source I use is Bulbapedia, as that's kind of a long-running, I don't think it's Pokemon official, but a long-running approved, so to speak, and kind of universally accepted to be the most accurate Pokemon resource. I just didn't have it up, which is why I forgot about it, because for some reason it's been terrible. Like, look at that. It lags so hard when I have it open, so I didn't want to have it open for the entirety of the video. But as you can see here, goodness gracious, they have biology descriptions for every Pokemon, so I can go in here, check the biology descriptions against the Pokedex descriptions, against the book descriptions, and on the side of all this, I'm rewatching the TV show to see what the in-show Pokedex says versus the written Pokedex, to see what breeders and characters like Ash and Brock and Erica all have to say about these Pokemon and their behavior, because if, you know, Bulbasaur is described in the book as being a relatively solitary and kind of timid Pokemon, well, how does that stack up against what we saw in the show, where Bulbasaur of its own accord was taking care of an entire population of injured and abandoned Pokemon, and being the one that was first to fight anything that came its way. So was that a unique situation that they did for the show to make Ash's Bulbasaur special, or is that actually their behavior? And who got it wrong, or who got it right? So this is also a very valuable source, is using Bulbapedia here. It has a lot more to it. I'm not going to scroll through, otherwise it'll take 10 minutes to get to the bottom of the page. But you can then learn about more game data, what moves they learn, and things like that, which then can teach you stuff, because if Bulbasaur didn't have vines, we wouldn't assume that it's able to catch bird Pokemon as prey. But because it has those, we know that it has a long range sort of trap mechanism, as well as Razor Leaf for long range damage. So it could be getting Pokemon like that, which then confirms the idea that it might eat bird Pokemon stated inside the book. So all of that kind of back and forth and double checking, triple checking, double checking, triple checking, is like I said, the hardest part. And sorry if that dragged on a little bit. I know it did, but it really takes that much to go into it. So then once I've gotten that organized into I'm just gonna close that so it doesn't lag my page anymore. Once I've got those organized into my sort of dump notes, where I just throw everything I've found that I can confirm to be accurate, I'll then take the time to turn it into a script. And while I'm doing that, I'll have, my books open, my notebooks open. I'll have all of these pages open for the specific Pokemon I'm talking about. And just to make sure I don't get anything wrong, because you know that once I post this, there's gonna be a lot of other PokeNerds out there like myself who come in and I assume from a good place, are going to be having a lot of corrections for this stuff if I don't get all this information correct on the first run. And I'd rather not have to make repeat videos to fix mistakes. I really want to do my best to get this all out there in one shot for each Pokemon. One, because it's so much work, but two, because I want this to be a perfect package for you guys to get everything you want out of this book, because not everybody has access to this book. I found them from $100 to $150 typically, when they were originally like $50. But Chris Stoll only made so many of them, as it's a private project he did. So I really wanted to give everybody a chance to appreciate all the work that went into this really amazing concept that he did here, and hoping that this continues to be something that he does for the rest of the generations. And if you're listening, Stoll, I would love to be your editor to help you do that, because I'm already obsessed with this. I already know way more about Pokemon than I think I rightfully should. So I'd be happy to help you out with that if you're continuing to do these books going forward, to make sure that they get done, because I want to see all 1,500 or whatever the heck we're at now of these Pokemon. But so once I've gone through all that stuff, I will put it into script work. And so that's the stage I'm on right now, going through and trying to make concise, well-formatted, well-delivered, informative scripts that don't dwell too much on just stuff that I find interesting, or just stuff that kind of caught my ADD eye or whatever. I want to make sure that this is efficient and effective as possible for you, the viewers, so that way you don't have to spend half an hour to learn the one fun fact you wanted. You can get all the pieces you need in maybe a 15-minute video, depending on how long each Pokemon kind of takes. And so, as you can see here from just the intro, it's a long process. Bulbasaur here has got about 4 pages of script, and then Ivysaur, Venusaur, and I've got it all the way down to Pidgeotto for now. So I've got 19 of these Pokemon done, or Pidgeot. I've got 19 of these Pokemon done with the rough script work. So at this point, I've just got to go through, clean it all up, double check to make sure I didn't get any of the information wrong, that I didn't, mix up something that I wanted to correct with something that I meant to give you guys, and turn all these script notes into final scripts so that I can then present them and make some videos out of them and post them to my YouTube and have a whole series about this. So that's kind of the gist of what goes into this. I know it felt a little chaotic throughout the course of watching this with me, so thank you for sticking around. But that's what it is. It is a little chaotic. It does feel very chaotic, especially for some of these Pokemon that have even less to talk about, because Bulbasaur is a weird one, but like I said, a lot of people have tried projects like these, so everybody who's done this has covered Bulbasaur because it's right at the front. But not everybody has gone as far back as Drowsy and its ability to impact people's sleep, or Abra's ability to teleport, or Ditto, or the Unknown, or Mew and Mewtwo, any of that stuff. So a lot of these ones that really break the kind of laws of nature are very complex and complicated and crazy to get behind, because at some points I'm trying to teach myself about theoretical dimensional travel to understand Abra's teleportation, which is literally one aspect of its entire being. So, if you guys have any sources out there that you find, if you guys have any information or ideas or inputs or corrections or anything, please, please, please let me know in the comments, DM me, whatever, because I am likely to miss one or two things in this avalanche of information that I get every single time I take on a new Pokemon. And, like I said, I want it to be the best it can be. So take a minute. Let me know if there's anything you think could help make this better. And otherwise, I look forward to seeing you in all these videos to come. So thanks for taking the time to watch this. I hope you appreciate the coolness of this whole project as much as I do, especially in time. And I hope to see you guys in the next video. Thanks.